Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a good Friday so far. If you're watching this live, again, I'm reminding those that are not saved, today's the day of salvation. And if you don't know the Lord Jesus Christ, you need to fall on your knees and ask for mercy and ask Him to come into your heart and your life. It'll be the best decision you ever made, not only in this life, but in the life to come. We're going to finish up with this weary and well doing with the help of the Lord today. Continuing on with Elijah, we've been talking about him for a couple of episodes here. And if you missed it, they're still on Facebook. And if it's too late for Facebook, they'll be on our YouTube channel at God's Healing Springs Baptist. There's several of these here on that YouTube, as well as about total 600 of our services from the past. And if you haven't tried it out, I encourage you to do that. I would also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. It would help us out in getting the word out to people, the word of the Lord out. Anyway, let me hurry up and go. 1 Kings chapter 19. We've talked about Ahab had been doing evil in the sight of the Lord, and there's a lot of things that happened to Ahab because the Lord used Elijah to do it. And then Elijah got afraid and he wandered off and left his help, and he wound up in a cave feeling sorry for himself. And the Lord came by, and that's where we're going to pick up. And we're going to start at verse 12. And said, after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in it. In the fire, it hadn't been in the earthquake, and he hadn't been in the wind that come before the fire, but he went before them. We talked about that on Wednesday. And the still small voice is what we're concentrating on now, and that's the voice of the Lord. A lot of times he'll speak to us quietly after all through, and to speak through even the most terrifying times that we're going through. Sometimes we bring them upon on ourselves, and sometimes things just happen. That still small voice, if we're paying attention to it, can cut through all the storms and all the distractions and all the trouble we have. And that's what the Lord was doing here with Elijah after he allowed him to kind of sink down and think that there was nothing left for him to do. Well, the Lord is, when there's nothing left for us to do for the Lord, if we're Christians, most of the time, if we wind up sidelined too long, sometimes he'll shake us up and wake us up and put us back to work. And hopefully we don't have to wait until he shakes us up too much so that we can call on him and get back and get back in line and get about his business before he has to do some shaking. But anyway, let's go on. Verse 13, it says, and it was so, when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out, when he heard the still small voice now, and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice unto him and said, what doest thou, Elijah? Now we know the Lord had asked him that earlier because we read about it on Wednesday. Well, he still is asking Elijah, what are you doing here? Well, the Lord knows, like I said Wednesday, when the Lord asks a question of someone through the Holy Spirit now, when we're Christians, he ain't asking it because he don't know the answer. He's asking it because we need to realize what the answer to that question that he's asking us is for our well-being. Verse 14 continues, and this is Elijah responding back to the Lord again on the same question he had asked. The Lord had asked him before the wind and the fire and the earthquake. And he said, I have been very jealous for the Lord of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, and slain thy prophets with the sword, and I, even I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away. Well, the Lord asked him the same question twice. At least he was still giving him the same answer, although it was the wrong answer, as we'll see going forward. Like I said, self-pity a lot of times. Pride starts up, then pity, and then worry, and then fear, and that's where we get into an awful mess a lot of times as Christians. But guess what? The Lord knows all about it, and the Lord will help us if we will call upon him. And the Lord said unto him, Go, return on thy way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when thou comest, anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. So the Lord's picking him up. He's dusting him off. He's kind of straightening his little hair out, I guess, so to speak, standing him up straight and getting him ready to go back to work. The Lord had done allowed him to lay there long enough. We had said something about 40 days before when the angel fed him. We talked about that Wednesday. So now he's saying, come on, wake up. You get to work. So he's giving him jobs to do. The Lord wasn't through with him. So that was the first job he had given him. And he said in verse 16, and this is the Lord still talking to Elijah, and Jehu, the son of Nimshi, shalt thou anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat, and Abel-Meholah, shalt thou appoint to be prophet in thy room. In other words, he's telling them, these two men that he mentioned to start with, Hazael and Jehu, will be the king. One of them is going to be the king over Syria, and Elijah is going to anoint him. And the other one's going to be the king over Israel, and Elijah is going to anoint him. So that means Ahab's time limited because God's put a clock on him, and he's going to allow Elijah to be involved there. And then he's telling him there's a man named Elisha who sounds a lot like Elijah, but he's a different man. He's a young man. And he's telling him that you're going to anoint him to be prophet. When it says in thy room, that means in his place. In other words, he's preparing somebody to continue on the work that Elijah has done. He's going to let Elijah be involved in God's preparation of the person that's going to replace him. Now, a lot of times we as Christians forget that. We think we're going to live forever, I guess. I don't know. But we forget that the Lord not only wants us to witness to other people who are lost, he also wants us to disciple the new Christians that are being brought into the fold so they'll better understand what's the word of the Lord and what the will of the Lord is, and help them to grow in the Lord through the Lord's leadership of us older Christians. And we forget that we need to be following the leadership of the Lord and preparing folks to take our place, because we don't know. One day, I don't know how long when my last breath's going to come, and neither does anybody else. But one day it's going to be time where our voices are going to be stilled. We're going to, regardless of whether it's by the rapture or whether it is by death, our voices are going to be stilled. We will not have a chance to do anything else for the Lord, to help anybody else be prepared to carry on and telling other people about the Lord. So we need to be mentors. We need to be disciples. We need to be following the leadership of the Lord, not all build up on ourselves and patting ourselves on the back of that, throwing our chest out about how good we need to be. We need to be humble, and we need to be looking up to the Lord, and we need to be telling people about the Lord and how he's used us and how he will use them if they will just submit themselves to him. And if somebody says, I don't know what the Lord wants me to do. Well, you know how they find out what the Lord wants them to do? Just like anybody, we ask him, and he will show us. He will help us. He'll not send us to do something that he's not going to prepare and help us to do. Anyway, I feel like that was an important thing for me to say here. And then verse 17. And it came to pass that this is the Lord still talking to him. Before I got off on this last thought, the Lord's still telling him, and it shall come to pass that him that escapeth the sword of Hazael shall Jehu slay. So he's telling him, you're going to appoint this king of Syria named Hazael, and that they're going to battle against the prophets of Baal, and they're going to battle against the evil people that God allows them to battle against. and he's going to give them victory. And he says, those that escape from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu slay, and him that escapeth from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha slay. And here in verse 18, where he drives home the fact that Elijah, although he was all wrapped up and thought he was the only one left that was serving the Lord, God put a thumbtack in this right here. Verse 18 says, yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel, and all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth which hath not kissed him. So he let Elijah know he wasn't the last one. And God didn't really need Elijah, but he wanted to allow Elijah to do something for him. And we need to remember that too. He can get that stuff done without us, but it sure is a blessing when he lets us be involved. Now, verse 19 says, so he departed thence and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him. And with the 12th, Elisha passed by him, and Elijah passed by him, talking about he passed by Elisha, and cast his mantle upon him. In other words, the mantle he was wearing, he walked by, he knew that was the man God was was leading him to, and cast his mantle upon him. Well, Elijah, about 10 years passed, and Elisha grew in faith and in deed, and he grew with Elijah walking along with him and helping mentor him, as I said. And Elijah continued strong also in the spirit and performed miracles by the Lord. Matter of fact, Ahab, he was still around for a while. Ahab, that old evil king. Well, he didn't change a whole lot. So he didn't get his eyes opened up when the rest of Israel did. Well, he continued to do evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord told Elijah to go to Ahab and tell him, your time's up, bud. And he also, so he went and prophesied to Ahab and told him what the Lord told him to do, not in the words I just used. You can read it over there in chapter 20 of 1 Kings for yourself. But he also told him that his wife, Jezebel, was going to die for her sins and iniquities. And he told him that the dogs would eat her. And that happened later on. You can see over in 2 Kings where that prophecy come true. Now, Elijah knew after, like I said, it's close to around 10 years according to the timeline in C.I. Scofield Bible. He knew that his time had come for his departure. So we're going to flip over here to 2 Kings, chapter 2. We're going to read verse 8. Verse 8 says, and Elijah took his mantle and wrapped it together and smote the waters. And he's talking about the waters of Jordan here. And they were divided hither and thither. In other words, when he smote the waters of the river of Jordan, it parted just kind of like it had before. But this is the Lord letting Elijah do it. And so they too went over on dry ground. That's talking about Elisha and Elijah. Verse 9, and it came to pass when they were gone over that Elijah said unto Elisha, ask what I shall do for thee before I be taken away from thee. And Elisha said, I pray thee, let a double portion of thy spirit be upon thee, on me. Now, like I said, and we've already been talking, Elijah, the Lord allowed Elijah to do a whole lot. Well, Elisha wants twice, a double portion of that. Well, let's see. Verse 10 said, and he said, this is talking about Elijah, thou hast asked a hard thing. Nevertheless, if thou see when I am taken from thee, it shall be so unto thee. But if not, it shall not be so. So he's telling him it ain't up to me, it's up to the Lord whether or not you get what you've asked for. Verse 11 said, and it came to pass as they still went on. They're walking side by side. They get a hold of this and talked. They went on and talked that, behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire and parted them both asunder. In other words, this chariot and the horses of fire come in between Elijah and Elisha. And Elijah went up in a whirlwind into heaven. Now, this is pretty good finish for this old guy here that had been pouting over there and feeling sorry for himself. When he got back on the job, this is a pretty good ending for him right here. He didn't die. He went to heaven in a chariot of fire. Verse 12 said, and Elisha saw it. He cried, my father, the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof. And he saw him no more. And he took hold of his own clothes, and he rent them in two pieces. And he took up also the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and went back and stood on the bank of Jordan. Now, like I said, being weary and well-doing happens to all of us. If we try to serve the Lord long enough, sooner or later, it's going to happen. If it hadn't happened to you yet, then at least you'll be prepared a little bit by what we've read. And if you start feeling that way, just remember what happened to Elijah. First, he got built up in pride, thinking he was the only one there that could do it. He told some folks that. Then he got to being a little bit worried. He got to being afraid. And then he left his help. That's one of the worst things a Christian can do when hard times fall upon us, or when we start feeling ourselves drifting from the Lord, is leave our help. Our help's in the church. Our help's with the Lord. The church alone can't help us if we're not keeping our eyes on the Lord. But the worst thing you can do is leave your help when you start getting in trouble. And that's something to remember also. Well, I love you. I hope y'all have a good weekend. Remember the Lord's Day coming up. It'll be what we all call Palm Sunday. And be in a church of your choice. And if you don't have a home church and you live around the Whitmire area, join us over at God's Healing Springs Baptist Church on Old Highway 176, and at 10 o'clock for Sunday school, 11 o'clock for the worship service. Y'all tell somebody about Jesus.